I did not marry a complicated man. Someone had been writing in the margins of my letters for 20 years. She is almost ready. That is what they wrote on the last one. I did not find it until last Thursday. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest. I want you to understand the specific quality of what I believed I had. The particular security of a woman who had stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop because 12 years had passed and it had not dropped, and she had finally understood that some people were simply what they appeared to be. I was that woman until 4 months ago. Then the name appeared on his phone. Not a dramatic moment. Not a confrontation or a discovery or a scene I can point to as the moment everything changed. His phone on the kitchen counter, buzzing while he showered, the screen lighting with a name I did not recognize. A name. That was all. I put the kettle on. I told myself it was nothing. The name appeared again that evening, and the following morning before he was awake, and the evening after that while we were watching television together, his phone face down on the cushion beside him, buzzing twice in 10 minutes, his hand moving to it and away from it in the specific gesture of a person deciding not to look at something in front of someone else. I noticed the gesture. I noticed and I said nothing. In the morning I began writing things down. Not because I had decided something was wrong, because I was a secondary school English teacher who had spent 20 years teaching students to read what language concealed as carefully as they read what language stated, because the gesture had been language, because language was my instrument. I found the letters on a Thursday, not hidden, in the second drawer of his desk, my handwriting on every envelope. 23 letters I had written to him in the first years of our marriage. He had kept everyone. I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not suspicion, tenderness. He had kept them. I opened the first one. My words, my handwriting. In the margin, in the white space beside my words, someone had written a response. Not him. Small, precise. Each letter pressed firmly and deliberately into the paper. I turned to the next letter. The same hand. I read all 23 on the floor of his study, every margin filled. Full conversation running alongside mine across 20 years of letters I had written to my husband. A conversation I had not known I was part of. I read the final margin response on the last letter, one line. The name on his phone belonged to whoever had been writing in my margins for 20 years. I have not told him what I found. I have not told him I recognized the handwriting. I have been writing everything down for 3 weeks. She is almost ready. I am trying to understand what I am almost ready for before it decides I am there. This is Scar Howl. Subscribe and like before it starts. Let's go. I want to tell you about the 12 years before I tell you about the 3 weeks after, because the 12 years are the evidence. I have been a secondary school English teacher for 20 years. 20 years of teaching students that a text could only be understood in its context, that the meaning of a word depended on every word around it, that you could not read a single sentence and understand it. You had to read everything that came before. The 12 years are the context. I need you to read them before you read the 3 weeks. We met at a work function, not our work, a mutual friend's work, the kind of gathering that assembled people who had no particular reason to be in the same room and occasionally produced the specific accident of 2 of them becoming important to each other. He was standing near the window, holding a glass of wine he was not drinking, looking at the room with the patient attention of someone who was content to observe rather than participate until participation became necessary. I noticed him because he was not performing. Every other person in the room was performing. The specific social performance of professional gatherings, the version of yourself you assembled for rooms full of people you needed to impress. He was not assembled. He was simply standing there. I went and stood beside him. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing important. Books, the specific failure of the catering, whether the person in the corner had arrived wearing that hat or had found it somewhere in the building. He made me laugh 3 times, not with jokes, with observations, the specific quality of a mind that noticed things and reported them exactly as they were without embellishment or performance. I gave him my number before I left. He called the following Tuesday. We were married 2 years later. I want to tell you about the marriage the way I would tell a student to read a text. Slowly, completely, with attention to what the details implied rather than just what they stated. He was a structural engineer. He spent his days understanding why things held together and why they failed. He brought this thinking home without intending to. He assessed load-bearing walls when we visited friends. He noted the specific points of weakness in buildings we passed on the street. He could not turn it off because it was not a professional mode he switched into. It was how he thought, how he saw the world. Everything had a structure. Everything had points where the structure was strong and points where it was vulnerable. I thought about that now. I thought about what the structure of our marriage looked like from outside it, from a position that could see the load-bearing points and the vulnerabilities, and the specific places where something had been introduced that the structure had been built to accommodate without my knowledge. In the first years, we lived in a flat in the city, small, well-lit. The specific cheerful inadequacy of a space two people had filled with the accumulated objects of two separate lives being merged into one. Books everywhere. My books and his books, eventually indistinguishable from each other, the way long marriages made the possessions of two people indistinguishable. His 3 authors on my shelves, my literature on his, the dishwasher loaded in his way because I had stopped correcting it and started finding his system rational, even though I would never tell him that. We were happy, not the happiness of people who had settled, the happiness of people who had chosen correctly and knew it, and were still surprised by the knowing. We moved to the house in year 4, he found it. He had been looking in a specific area. Not the area we had discussed, not the area that made practical sense, given our respective workplaces, but an area, further out, quieter, the edge of something that had once been countryside before the city reached it and enclosed it without fully absorbing it. I had not questioned the area. He had reasons, the price, the space, the specific quality of the light in the morning. All of them true, all of them sufficient. I had not questioned them because I trusted him completely. 20 years of my letters, someone had been writing back in every single one. She is almost ready. I did not know that yet. I am telling you now so you understand what the 12 years were for. We have lived in the house for 8 years. The Sunday calls to his mother, every week without fail for 12 years. I had always loved that about him, the specific loyalty of it. The man who maintained his relationships with the same consistency he brought to everything else. I had met his mother 11 times across 12 years. She lived far enough away to make visits infrequent, but close enough that infrequent was a choice rather than a necessity. She was a quiet woman, precise in the way that some people who had spent a long time alone became precise. Every word chosen, every action deliberate. The economy of a person who had learned not to waste anything on what was not necessary. She had looked at me the first time we met with the specific attention of someone watching a process reach its expected stage. I had thought it was the assessment of a mother watching her son's wife. The specific scrutiny of a woman who wanted to know if the person her son had chosen was worthy of the choosing. I thought about it differently now. I wrote it in my notebook, his mother. The 11 visits, the way she looked at me, the way the Sunday calls ran precisely to 30 minutes, not approximately, precisely. The calls ending at the same point every week, with the same exchange, the same sign-off, the same specific goodbye, the same way the margin responses ended, a specific phrase, always the same, the last line of every margin response across 23 letters across 20 years, not she is almost ready. That was only on the last one. The others ended differently. I had read them so many times in the 3 weeks since Thursday that I could recite them in order. Letter 1. She is beginning to notice. Letter 4. She is asking the right questions without knowing they are questions. Letter 9. She is building the record without knowing what the record is for. Letter 14. She does not know she is being read. Letter 19. She is almost there. Letter 23. She is almost ready. 20 years of margin responses tracking a progression, not his progression, mine. I sat with my notebook open on the kitchen table and looked at the progression laid out across 6 pages of my own handwriting. She is beginning to notice. She is asking the right questions. She is building the record. She does not know she is being read. She is almost there. She is almost ready. I looked at my notebook, my handwriting, my small, precise hand. The handwriting of a woman who pressed firmly into every page as if the only way to make something permanent was to press it into existence. Small, precise, each letter deliberate. I looked at the margin responses in my memory. I put the pen down. I picked it up again. I kept writing. I want to tell you about the name. 4 months of it appearing on his phone before I understood what it was. I had not gone through his phone. I want to be clear about that again because it matters. I had not decided to investigate. I had not made a choice to look. The name had simply appeared in my field of vision on a phone that was not face down often enough, and a marriage that had never required me to look away. I had been reading it in glimpses. The name itself. I will not write it here because writing it feels like a different kind of acknowledgement than I am ready for. But the name had a quality to it, a specific register, old-fashioned in the way that some names were old-fashioned. Not the old-fashioned of a name that had fallen out of use, but the old-fashioned of a name that had never been in use in the way ordinary names were in use. The kind of name that belonged to something older than the convention of naming. I had thought this was fanciful when it first occurred to me. I was an English teacher. I was prone to reading significance into language that had none. I stopped thinking it was fanciful on the night I found the margin responses. The margin responses were not signed, but the final one had something beneath it. So small I had almost missed it on the first reading, a mark rather than a word. The specific mark of something that had been used as a signature for longer than signatures had existed in their current form. I recognized it, not from anything I had read, not from my 20 years of teaching literature, or the 12 years of a marriage to a man who read the same 3 authors in rotation. I recognized it the way you recognize something you had always known without knowing you knew it. The way you recognized a sound you had heard in sleep. I drew it in my notebook. I looked at it for a long time. Then I wrote beneath it, "This is not a person." I sat with that sentence for the rest of the night. In the morning, I researched the name, not on his phone, not through any access to his accounts or messages that would have required me to cross the line I had not crossed. Through my own resources, 20 years of teaching English literature, the specific accumulated knowledge of a mind that had read widely and retained what it read, the mark I had copied into my notebook, the name as I had read it in glimpses on the screen of a phone that was not always face down. I found it. Not in any contemporary record, not in anything that existed in the digital world that had been created in the last 30 years. In a text I had taught twice in my career, once at the beginning, when I was still learning to teach it, once in the middle, when I understood it well enough to teach the parts I had not understood the first time. An old text, the kind that required significant preparation before you could teach it, not because the language was difficult, but because the context it assumed was no longer common knowledge. The kind of text that recorded things people had once known and had allowed themselves to forget, because forgetting had seemed safer than continuing to know. The name was in that text, not as a person, as a designation, the specific designation of something that selected, that had always selected, across more recorded history than most people were comfortable acknowledging, that selected for a specific capacity, the capacity to perceive what others could not perceive, the capacity to document what others could not document, the capacity to build the record of its presence across a lifetime of ordinary life without knowing that was what the record was for. I read the relevant passages 3 times. I took photographs of the pages. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the photographs for a very long time. The text was specific about the mechanism, about how the selection worked, about what it looked for in a person and how long the looking took and what the presence of the right person meant for whatever had been waiting for them. It did not select randomly. It observed. For years, sometimes decades, it watched a person develop the capacity it needed the way a gardener watched something grow. Not intervening, not directing, simply present and patient and certain that the growing was going in the right direction. It waited for the capacity to reach the required point. Then it made contact, not directly, not obviously, through proximity, through a person already in the selected person's life, someone who had been positioned there, not necessarily knowingly, to provide the conditions the selection required, the house in the right location, The drawer in the right room. The letters in the drawer. I put the photographs down. I looked at the kitchen. The ordinary kitchen of an ordinary house that had been chosen in year 4 of my marriage by a man I trusted completely because he was uncomplicated, and I had chosen uncomplicated deliberately. He had reasons, the price, the space, the quality of the light in the mornings, all of them true, all of them sufficient, and none of them the reason the house was 3 kilometers south of a tree line that had been here before the roads and would be here after them. I wrote, "He may not know." I looked at that for a very long time. He may not know. The text did not say the positioned person always knew their role. He may have chosen the house because of the price and the space and the light in the mornings, and something may have been ensuring for years before he looked that when he looked this specific house would seem perfect to him. I closed the photographs. I added them to the documentation. Then I made dinner. He came home at his usual time. He kissed me. He asked about my day. I told him about my classes. The year 10 group that was finally beginning to understand what subtext meant. The year 12 student whose essay had surprised me with its precision. He listened the way he always listened. Present, attentive, the uncomplicated attention of a man who was genuinely interested in the person he had married. I watched him across the dinner table. I thought, he does not know. And then I thought, or he does not know that he knows. And then I thought, or he has always known. And the not telling is part of the structure too. I did not know which was true. I was building the record to find out. He went to bed at his usual time. I stayed at the kitchen table. I opened the notebook. I kept writing. I want to tell you about what I found when I went back to the letters. I had read them on the Thursday. I had put them back. I had made dinner. I had sat across from my husband and said nothing. On the Friday, I went back to the drawer. I needed to read them again, more slowly, with the specific attention I brought to a text I was teaching, not for the story, but for what the story implied, what the structure of it revealed about what was not being said. I took them to the kitchen table. I read each margin response in sequence. She is beginning to notice, written in the margin of a letter I had written in the 3rd month of our marriage. A letter about the specific happiness of an ordinary Tuesday, the specific happiness of a life that felt finally settled, the happiness of a woman who had chosen uncomplicated and understood for the first time what uncomplicated felt like from the inside. Something had read that letter and noted that I was beginning to notice. Notice what? I had not been noticing anything in the 3rd month of my marriage. I had been happy. Specifically, uncomplicated happy. Unless the noticing was not what I thought noticing meant. Unless the noticing was not observation but something else. The quality of attention I brought to a room when I entered it. The way I read language before I had consciously decided to read it. The specific instinct of a mind trained to find what was absent in a text as easily as what was present. She is beginning to notice. Perhaps the noticing was not about my husband. Perhaps the noticing was about itself. About whatever had been reading my letters and writing in the margins and tracking a progression across 20 years of correspondence. Perhaps I had begun to notice it. Without knowing what I was noticing, I wrote this in my notebook. Then I wrote, "It has been watching me develop the capacity for 20 years. It noted when the capacity began. It has been tracking it since. The progression in the margin responses is not the progression of my marriage. It is the progression of my ability to perceive it. I sat with that for a long time. She is building the record without knowing what the record is for. I looked at my notebook, 12 weeks of documentation, the name, the timing of the messages, the 14 entries on his waking, the 6 pages of margin responses transcribed and analyzed. I had been building a record without knowing what the record was for. I understood now what the record was for. The record was the proof, not proof of wrongness in the marriage, not proof of betrayal in the conventional sense, not the evidence a lawyer assembled or a counselor worked through. The record was the proof that I could perceive it, that I had the specific capacity, the noticing instinct, the documentation habit, the patience to build evidence before acting on it, that something had been waiting for across 20 years of margin responses, ready to perceive it completely, ready to understand what she had been building toward, ready to know what she was. I sat with those 3 lines for a very long time. What she was, not who she was. What? I had been an English teacher long enough to know that the choice of pronoun mattered. That what implied a category rather than a person. That whatever had been reading my letters for 20 years and tracking my progression had never thought of me as a person in the way that I thought of myself as a person. It had thought of me as a what, a specific type, a specific capacity, the specific combination of instinct and training and patience that it had been waiting for across however many failed selections and however many women who were almost right, and however many margin responses in however many sets of letters, in however many drawers, in however whoses, chosen specifically for their proximity to the tree line. I was not the first. I was the one who had developed the capacity far enough. I wrote, I am what it has been selecting for, not me specifically, the capacity specifically. I happened to develop the capacity to the required level. Another woman could have been here instead, has been here instead possibly, in other attempts. The selection is not personal. It is functional. I looked at that for a long time. Then I wrote, but it is personal now, because it is me, because I am the one sitting at this table with this notebook and this pen and this specific documentation of 12 weeks of a marriage that turns out to have been pointed at a tree line 3 kilometers north. It is personal because it is happening to me. And I am going to finish the sentence. Close the notebook. I opened it again. I wrote at the top of a fresh page in my clearest, most deliberate hand. What am I almost ready for? I left the rest of the page blank. I looked at the blank page for a long time. Then I turned to the next page and kept writing. It is a Sunday morning. He is on the phone to his mother. I can hear his voice from the other room. The familiar cadence of the Sunday call. The specific rhythm of a conversation that had run to the same length at the same time every week for as long as I had known him, 30 minutes. I am sitting at the kitchen table with my notebook open in front of me. I have been sitting here for an hour before he woke. The documentation is extensive now, 12 weeks of entries. The progression laid out across 40 pages in my small, precise hand. The margin responses transcribed and analyzed in parallel columns. The name and its appearances logged by date and time. The entries on his waking. The language shifts catalogued with the specific examples that illustrated them. The words he had chosen differently. The conversations that had acquired the slight imprecision of editing. I have also added a new section, the house. I have been thinking about the house for the past week. He chose it, year 4 of our marriage. The specific area, further out than made practical sense. The edge of something that had once been countryside before the city reached it and enclosed it without fully absorbing it. I had not questioned the area at the time. He had reasons, the price, the space, the quality of the light in the mornings, all of them true, all of them sufficient. I had not questioned them because I trusted him completely. Last Tuesday, I drove the route from the house outward, 3 kilometers north of the house, a piece of land I had never had reason to go to. Unremarkable from the road, a tree line, the specific density of old growth that had been here before the roads and would be here after them. I parked the car. I walked to the tree line. I stood at the boundary of it for a long time. The silence inside it was maintained, practiced. The silence of something that had been here continuously and had never left. Not the silence of a wood in winter, not the silence of an empty space, the occupied silence. The silence of presence so complete and so long established that it had become the defining quality of the air inside the tree line, rather than simply an absence of sound. I stood at the boundary and I understood why the house was 3 kilometers south. Not so far that the proximity was lost, not so close that I would have noticed it immediately. 3 kilometers, the specific distance of something that knew how close was close enough, and how close was too close, and had calibrated the positioning accordingly. I had been living 3 kilometers from this for 8 years. I had driven past the tree line hundreds of times on the road that ran north of the house. I had never stopped before. I had never felt the need to stop before. And now I was standing at the boundary of it in the specific cold of a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, and I understood that the need had always been there. Underneath, maintained. The way the silence inside the tree line was maintained, simply present, waiting for the right moment to surface. I did not go in. I was not ready. She is almost ready. Not yet. I went back to the car. I drove home. I added it to the notebook. The house is 3 kilometers south of the tree line. He chose the house. He positioned us 3 kilometers south of something I have been documenting for 12 weeks without knowing it was there. The marriage is the context. The house is the proximity. The letters in his drawer are the mechanism by which I was read. The tree line is where it waits. I looked at that last line for a very long time. The tree line is where it waits, not where it lives, not where it is from, where it waits. The distinction matters. Waiting implies a specific thing being waited for, a specific moment, a specific threshold. Almost ready, almost. His voice from the other room. The Sunday call reaching its customary point. The exchange that always ended it. The same words, the same tone, the same goodbye. I think about his mother, her precise quiet, the 11 visits, the way she looked at me. I think about the first visit, 12 years ago, before we were married. He had wanted me to meet her and I had said yes because saying yes to the things that mattered to him was part of what I had decided loving him would mean. She had sat across the table from me and looked at me with the specific attention of someone watching a process reach its expected stage. I had thought it was a mother assessing her son's choice. Now I thought it was something else entirely. Now I thought she had been told what to look for and had been looking and had found it. Was confirming the finding to whatever had sent her to look. I thought about the Sunday calls, 30 minutes every week. The same exchange, the same sign-off. I thought about what those calls were for. Not what he thought they were for, what they were actually for. He comes into the kitchen. He smiles at me. The uncomplicated smile of a man who has just spoken to his mother and had his coffee made by his wife and has no reason to believe that anything about this Sunday is different from any other Sunday in 12 years of Sundays. I smile back. I ask him about his mother. He tells me ordinary things, the specific, ordinary things of an ordinary Sunday call. I listen. I think about the clearing in the dream. I have been having the dream since I was 7 years old. A northern forest, a clearing, something at the center of it. I am standing at the edge of the clearing, looking at the center, and the dream always ends at the moment before I would see what is there. The moment before the clarity arrives. The specific frustration of a dream that ends exactly 1 second before it would have told you what you needed to know. I have had this dream for 31 years. I am 38 years old. I have been in this marriage for 12 years. I have been living 3 kilometers from a tree line for 8 years. The first margin response was written in a letter from the 3rd month of our marriage, and the dream began 19 years before the first margin response. Whatever has been reading my letters has been present in my life for longer than the letters, longer than the marriage, longer than him. He finishes talking about his mother. He picks up his coffee. He looks at me with 12 years of a good ordinary uncomplicated marriage in his face. I look back, I think. I am going to tell him. Not today. Not until I understand what almost ready means and what changes when the threshold is crossed. But I am going to tell him. Because whatever has been reading my letters for 20 years selected me for the specific capacity I have been building across my entire professional life. The capacity to read what is absent as clearly as what is present. The capacity to document. The capacity to build the record until the record tells you something the individual observations could not. I have been building that record. For 12 weeks since Thursday. For 20 years in the margins of letters I did not know were being read. For 31 years in a recurring dream at the edge of a clearing I have never been able to see the center of. He always did things in the right order. I think about that. He always did things in the right order. That was one of the things I loved most about him. The structural engineer who could not turn off the instinct for sequence and method and the correct progression of steps. First things first, always. I think about what comes first. The record. The record comes first, then the tree line, then whatever is waiting at the center of the clearing. I pick up my pen. I open my notebook to a fresh page. I write at the top in my clearest, most deliberate hand, pressing each letter into the page the way I have always pressed letters into pages, the specific habit of a woman who understood that the only way to make something permanent was to press it into existence. The record is almost complete. I am going to see the center of the clearing. I am going to understand what I am almost ready for, before it decides I am there. and I am going to document every single thing I find. If you made it this far, you already know what Scar Howl is. Hit subscribe. The forest remembers everyone who listens. It will remember you.